Welcome to this Rhode Island Civic Learning Week event, Action Civics 101, a framework for student-led civic action projects. My name is Alicia Roth. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a senior program manager now at Generation Citizen. And this event is part of Rhode Island Civic Learning Week. And really the purpose of Rhode Island Civic Learning Week is to just celebrate and uplift and elevate all of the important things related to civic learning that sustain and strengthen our constitutional democracy. And if you want to learn more about what the event is, what the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition is, you can visit that website, ricivics.org/2023 CLW, and that will take you to everything, including where this event was listed. And this event is really organized by the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition, of which Generation Citizen is a part of, and we help lead that coalition. It's a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational coalition. And we're really committed to ensuring that all Rhode Islanders, regardless of age, not just youth, including young people and those most marginalized from our democratic system, have equitable access to high quality civic learning opportunities. And I just want to put out a little pitch. The Rhode Island Civic Learning Youth Committee, or Youth Fellows, are hosting an event tomorrow evening, 4:30 to 6 p.m. called Our Voice Matters. If you could join that, that would be fantastic. So essentially what the youth have organized is an event that will have youth engage in a discussion, and then policymakers will engage in a discussion. It's kind of like a fishbowl, if people are familiar with that. And then there'll be a Q&A, and I'm really excited for it. It seems like a great event, and I will pop the registration for that in the chat. Okay. And last but not least, thank you to all of the co-hosts who have made today possible. Courageous RI, Generation Citizen, the Secretary of State's office, the Media Education Lab at University of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Department of Education, and United Way of Rhode Island. It's really important to have partners in this work, and we're really grateful for the ones that we do have. And without further ado, I'm going to get to the discussion. All right. So the reason I wanted to do this presentation, which is really just like high-level overview of Action Civics and what it is today, is that there's a lot of different moving parts related to civic education in Rhode Island currently, including the passing of the 2021 Civic Literacy Act, which requires teachers to start implementing student-led civic action projects. It has yet to be determined by the Rhode Island Department of Education exactly how and when those projects will be incorporated into the graduation requirements and the curriculum. But this is just a peek inside what those student-led civic action projects look like. It's one example, because there's multiple organizations involved in this work, and there's more than one way to do a civic action project. Just let some people in. And so the idea is this is a really high-level overview. You're going to learn about the characteristics of a high-quality Action Civics project. You're going to hear directly from teachers who have experience facilitating Action Civics project using Generation Citizen's framework. That includes me. I taught the curriculum as a first-year teacher, and I also have some video and a video testimonial from a teacher and a couple of quotes weaved in throughout. Fortunately, I wasn't able to get somebody here to co-present with me today. Teachers are busy, go figure. You're also going to get to see some student work samples and hear from students. I've tried to make this as student-centered and teacher-centered as possible. Also, just to give myself a break from talking. All right, and our agenda for today, we're going to be thinking first a little meta idealistically about what our ideal graduate looks like, what they can do. And then I'll get into a really hopefully short intro to GC, what Action Civics is theoretically, right? And why Action Civics is an important tool in our toolkit for sustaining democracy. And then I'll spend the majority of our time talking about the how and walk through what we call the advocacy hourglass and looking at examples from the classroom. And then I'll revisit our why and look at teacher and student impacts of engaging in Action Civics. And hopefully we will have some time for Q&A at the end, but I've also weaved in some spots to answer questions throughout. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm happy to break this up as much as possible. And I want you to take a moment now and think about one question you would like to explore through today's session. So if there's one question I could answer for you today that would be useful to you, what's that question? Let's take a moment to think about what you're trying to get out of today's session. And if you'd like to share, I encourage that. Would anybody like to share? You can put it in the chat. You can come off mute.
I can start. I teach seniors, so I have one section of civics, but I mainly actually have freshman students, and we take world history here at Narragansett. So my wondering or curiosity would be, how can we include continual reading and writing and those strong skills and content, not only in terms of the content they're learning, but keep those skills sharp from year to year. I've noticed that from my freshmen to my seniors, especially just due to COVID, but also developmentally too, there's a very varying ability there. Which is good because it shows you where they start high school versus where they end, but just continually seeing those skills being sharpened each year. Because civics is a lot, especially when they do their action research project and they do all their research. It's all encompassing, and it's a great venture, but also it's a lot to take into.
Yeah, good question. Okay, I'll see if I can incorporate that. Any others? So, Victoria, it sounds like you have actually done either this project or something similar to it before.
I'm currently, it's my first year here at Narragansett, but I believe after several years, they've gone through different research projects. So their seniors to graduate have to do a research project, meaning like the actual paper process, like go through annotated bibliography, do the English side of it, and then for the history content of it, they actually do their actual presentation in front of the class, create a product. But it's nice because the two contents areas are really nicely interweaved, and also students too have a direct investment in their learning. So it's really great in that they're not only learning content historically and talking about what civics engagement is and how we study history, but they also take active ownership of their content, and they do a passion project of their own and do the research process, which is great.
Amazing. Wonderful. Perfect. Okay. That ties in very well with Action Civics and what the GC curriculum offers. So without further ado, oh, Kristen, you went to the first vote presentation. I'm really glad that that was super valuable. I was excited for that and was sorry that I wasn't able to physically go to that session. So thanks for sharing. So I want to take a moment together as a group to think about what our ideal high school graduate looks like. What does a civic-minded graduate look like? And here are my questions for prompting. What do these students know or graduates know? What can they do? And how do they feel about their civic life and civic opportunities? So I want to give you like 60 seconds. I'll actually set a timer to think about that, and then we can do some sharing out. So what does a civic-minded graduate look like? Feel free to just type it straight in the chat. Can just think about it. Come off mute when you're ready. And I will set that timer. About 10 more seconds. All right. Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so they can connect with their learning in class to the greater community, right? They have that that critical thinking and connection level, right? Even if they're learning about the progressive era, they can make connections to today and what's happening in their community. Anything else anybody would like to share about what their hopes are for students when they graduate from high school? What they will know, be able to do, and how they'll feel regarding civic life?
I would hope that students would feel empowered, not only to enter conversations that may be considered easier, but also enter conversations in which maybe their perspective isn't in the majority. So recognizing that with history, a lot of times certain narratives can be understood, but also recognize what's omitted is also important to remember.
Absolutely, yeah. Susan shares they understand the importance of civic participation. Mary Ellen shared that they feel empowered to use their voice to advocate for issues they care about. Yeah, it's all great stuff. Heidi shares they should feel confident about becoming voters and know the importance of being involved in government. Yeah. Confidence, feeling empowered, knowing how to do those things, right? Understand the roles and responsibilities of a citizen, have the confidence to participate. They know how government works, how they can participate as a citizen in it. They're active citizens in our democracy, and they feel like real participants in our democracy. Right? Thank you. So the reason I wanted to start with this is actually how we start our teacher PDs. We start with the end in mind, right? Partially because engaging in a student-led civic action project is a pretty scary thing for a lot of teachers, whether it's due to our political climate and the scrutiny that teachers are being put under, the different laws that are being passed around the country regarding what can be discussed in schools and how students can engage with the community as part of a classroom. And or even just handing over the reins to students and being willing to see them flail about a bit, right? Because when students are engaging in a student-led project, there's going to be lots of stops and starts, a lot of getting stuck. And so we really want to be thinking about the bigger picture of like, why are we doing this? What makes this worth it, right? And so that's how I wanted to start today as well. And these images are from our teacher PD. These are lists created by GC teachers. So I will hopefully be able to give you a very brief overview of the who, what, and why of GC Action Civics. And so I'm going to start with Generation Citizen, who we are, right? So the focus of Generation Citizen is to strengthen our democracy, beginning with our nation's young people. And our mission is to transform civics education so that young people are equipped and inspired to exercise their civic power, very much like what y'all shared in the chat, and Victoria, you shared out loud. And our vision that in doing that, we will have a just, inclusive democracy that is really responsive to all young people. And Action Civics is the vehicle through which we put most of, or a lot, if not most of our work at GC. We also do some advocacy to support strong civic education. But Action Civics is our bread and butter. So what is Action Civics? Action Civics is a hands-on experiential democracy education that reflects the powerful learning that happens when young people see themselves as community problem solvers and change makers. And what makes it community-based is really the fact that GC works incredibly closely with individual teachers, with schools, and with districts to make sure that when they are starting to adopt the curriculum, that they're doing so in a way that is really mindful and thoughtful about what their students need to engage in Action Civics successfully, right? We have a place-based approach. We try to work very closely with our teachers and our schools. And why Action Civics? Why put students in the position of being community change makers rather than just delivering the knowledge, the civic knowledge that they need? Well, one, our democracy is not equal, right? So if you look at Congress and, honestly, even at the local level and state level, oftentimes our government is not representative of the communities that they are serving. And this unequal representation results in policies that actually disadvantage communities of color and low-income communities disproportionately. And so we turn to civic education as a way to solve this unequal representation problem. And we work closely with students from under-resourced schools. By under-resourced, essentially what we need is that state governments have designated school districts as high needs. We don't only work with those schools, but we prioritize working with schools that have been designated as high needs to make sure that they get access to high quality experiential civic education. And the reason for that is, honestly, the research shows that students from high income districts, wider districts, are much more likely to have experiential civic learning opportunities. And civic education is underfunded, right? So we, in addition to working with schools and districts, we work with states to create policies that really help and support teachers in implementing high quality Action Civics education in their classrooms. And this is why Action Civics addresses those problems. They're student-led projects. Students care about the projects, exactly what Victoria was talking about at the beginning of this call, right? If a student owns the project, then they invest more of their energy in it, and the learning that they get from that project is so much more long-lasting and enduring, right? The issues are real world and personal to them. And they get an opportunity to look at the political processes and learn about the government, learn about their community in order to identify what the systemic root causes of those issues are and how they can be part of the change they want to see. And through reflection, they develop those civic dispositions that we all hope that they have. They realize that they have a voice and they have power. It's not that we empower them, it's that they already have power, right? We just have to help them see that they do have that power. So that's hopefully what engaging in an Action Civics project will do for students. And we represent the Action Civics process through our advocacy hourglass. And what this visual is meant to represent is the fact that they start broad with identifying what the issues in their community are as a class. They narrow down to one focus issue through a consensus building process. So one class works on one issue together, and through research, they identify a systemic root cause they find really compelling that they can then identify a systemic policy goal for. And then they can develop an action plan and engage with the influencers and decision makers in their community, engage in advocacy tactics, right? So that's what I'm going to be walking through today. Hopefully I will provide enough detail to make it meaningful for y'all without going too in the weeds. That's my goal. So you can see the big picture and also understand the tangibles for students and teachers. At this point, does anybody have any questions before I move on into the how of GC Action Civics and start getting into those nitty-gritty things? Practicing my wait time. I like to sing the things that I'm thinking about a lot. I think it makes PD interesting. My middle schoolers also enjoyed it. All right, let's move forward. Let me just check the time. I'm doing okay. All right, so the how of Action Civics. So I'm going to be using two different visuals to help anchor you in the process. One of them is our curriculum. This is the new one. It's going to be paired with that advocacy hourglass you saw before, because I want you to be able to understand how GC curriculum relates to that advocacy hourglass process, right? And so just this is, you don't have to read this, right? This is just what our current curriculum looks like. We're actually piloting a slightly expanded curriculum. And so this may change in the future. This is really just to like help teachers anchor in what's this process as a teacher versus what's the advocacy process. And I'm going to be pairing it with the project milestones. So in project-based learning, when you're planning a project for students, you want to have clear milestones where students know what they're producing when related to the ultimate project. And so that's why I put this in terms of milestones. So what is our first, phase of the project and project milestones? So in the beginning of the project, teachers are working with their students to establish a democratic classroom if they haven't already, right? Teachers tend to do norms at the beginning of the school year. Well, we propose writing a constitution, right? If students want to have agency and voice in their classroom, then they need to articulate what rights they have in that classroom and what responsibilities that they have in order to maintain and sustain that agency and voice in the classroom, right? So with great power comes great responsibility, right? So this is a bit of a shift from the norms thing. This isn't a list of rules. This is I have the right to be heard by my peers. And in order to maintain that right, we need to actively listen to each other, right? And so that's something that you come back to throughout the project. And I'll talk about how important that is later. Then once you've established those rights and responsibilities of the classroom, you introduce students to the project and you send them off to do community interviews. So they start with themselves, they reflect on what they care about, what the issues in the community are, they interview with each other, and hopefully they do their homework and they interview people in their community. They might interview other teachers, and they come back to their classroom with this big list of issues in their community. And through a series of activities, they slowly narrow that list down to 2 focus issues, hopefully, sometimes 3. 2 focus issues on which they will go through a consensus building process iteratively until they have consensus on their one focus issue for their class project. So what is consensus? Consensus is not every single student in the class is super excited at this project, right? Part of what students learn by going through this process is how to compromise, is how to make proposals and negotiate, how to include others and entice others into supporting you on something that you're excited about. And it gets them out of the debate, right? Because anybody who has taught middle school or high school knows that if there is any opportunity to get into a heated debate over nothing, students will take it, never mind something that actually matters to them, right? And so they get to participate in debates earlier on as part of the narrowing process. But once they get down to those two, it's about trying to get each other on board. It's about talking across difference respectfully, and having some difficult but courageous conversations with each other. So that's the first phase of this project, right? Is really setting the tone, getting students wrapping their head around what they're going to do, and then identifying what their particular focus issue is going to be. Again, that democratic classroom aspect of this is something that we spend a lot of time talking with our teachers about initially, because it's really important for students who are engaging in difficult conversations and about a project that they need to take ownership over, right? They need to be bought into the project, that the classroom is culturally responsive and sustaining, that it is student-centered. They feel like the teacher trusts them, right, to be in charge of their own learning, and that they have the norms and routines to engage in project-based learning successfully. And the reason that's all important is because their issue topics can include things that are very sensitive and need to be handled with care. So if you look at this list of focused issues that students have come up with in the past, you do see things like that have to do with mental health and racism and poverty. Like, these are all things that are very close to students' lived experiences and bring up a lot for students. And it can be incredibly healing to talk about this in a safe space and get to engage with it productively. But it's really important that for engagement in the project to establish that that democratic classroom, that democratic culture within the classroom first. And so I want to share a student perspective on consensus building. Can someone or a couple of people help me out with reading this? I got some volunteers.
I can read the first paragraph.
Thank you.
The consensus building process was probably the most interesting part of doing the Generation Citizen curriculum for me, just because each student or different groups do a different issue. And if you're really lucky, you have a lot of passion around each of those issues, and you have to take all that passion and meld it into a single issue for your single project.
Can I get a volunteer for the second paragraph?
I can do it for you.
Thank you.
Sure. And it's definitely very different from the things you usually do in a class. A lot of times teachers will let you decide what kind of project, not necessarily what kind of project you want to do, but like what specifically you want to do your project on. And if it's a class thing, maybe they'll do it straight majority vote. But I've never done a consensus-based project in a class outside the GC curriculum. And it's, again, very interesting because you really have to, talk to your classmates and convince them, or take their ideas into this one issue, this one project, convince them that this is the way to go. And that in doing this project, you have brought enough of their passion into it, enough of their issue into it for them to want to support that specific project.
All right. Can I get a volunteer for the last one too? I can also do it. Been talking a lot.
I can do it.
Thank you.
Both times that I've done it has led us to issues or ideas that we want to support within our project that we had never thought about before. And it was all because we had to get every member of our class on board with that project. So without that, I don't think either of the projects that I've had apart would have been nearly as good or impactful as they were with the input of my entire class, all of my classmates, some of them very stubborn if they want to be about their issue. But because of that, you really get to know your classmates better, and you also get the best project that you can.
So I have a video of this, but it's glitchy. And so I didn't want to distract from the power of his words, because I really appreciated his perspective. And you'll get to hear a little bit more from him later. His name is Duran. And I want to share a teacher perspective on consensus building as well.
Going through the process to pick a focus issue, this definitely can be a tough one because sometimes you have a million ideas and you're going through the and they're like, okay, how do we narrow this down? Sometimes, like, you know, it's a consensus process. You have to actually, because you have so many ideas, you actually have to start voting first before you can actually build consensus to narrow it down. But sometimes you have kids, I don't know. So that I still think is it can be a challenge. Is one, if students aren't sure what to do, and the other is when they're picking something that you think might not have, like, they can make an impact. So they're picking something that, yes, is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, but how can they, in the course of a semester or however much time you have, can they actually make some change or go through the process to make change? Because you don't want them to be, you want them to go through the process. Don't want them to be like severely disappointed either. So it's like going in between that. And it's, you know, what surprises you really about it is that like that the students every semester, sometimes you get similar topics, but like sometimes you get totally, you're like, I would have never even thought of that as a teacher. That was an issue. So it's really interesting to see the different group dynamics and what they come up with. Can surprise you every semester.
All right. Any questions about the first phase of this project, how students get to a single issue? All right. I can tell you personally, like as a teacher, it's a tough but incredibly rewarding experience. You learn a lot about your students, and you get to have some, you know, like interesting moments with them that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, right? When everybody's getting, you know, like super tense and they're like, all right, we need to take a break, and then something silly happens, right, to break the tension. So it's a really rewarding process, and is one of my favorite things about the project is that it is a whole class consensus-based project. And it's also what makes GC's curriculum a little unique compared to other student-led civic project providers and curriculums, is this whole class consensus-based project. All right, and the second phase is research, right? So you've got this focus issue and you need to, one, understand what the root causes of the issue is, right? The systemic root causes, who's involved in this issue in the community, what's been tried, who the community experts are, what can be done about it, right? So there's dedicated time for researching this and reaching out to the community members. And for that, we really rely on a participatory action research process. I forgot to include those words. So PAR stands for participatory action research. And what that means is something a little different than traditional academic research, right? They're not writing a paper, they're trying to figure out what to do next. So in order to do that, they need to engage with their community members. They need to identify local research, and they need to call people and email people and ask them what they think, and how they can help, right? And to do that, we suggest breaking students up into 4 different groups. It could be more, but this is the typical. And so there's a survey and interviews group. These students are just trying to collect data to synthesize and present to their class. There's a group of students who are reading local research articles, local news articles, and trying to figure out what's going on with the issue that's been reported. There's a group of students who are calling and emailing community experts, for example, like local nonprofit leaders or the head of the Department of Public Works, right? And also a group of students who are reaching out to elected officials and finding out what they think about this issue, what might be done. And hopefully through that process, students are narrowing down to a much more specific topic, right? So often what happens, if you remember I'm just gonna go back real quick. Whoop. This student focus issue slide, these are big topics, right? And students will come to consensus on something that is fairly huge, like racism or poverty. And that's not quite actionable yet, right? We need to get a lot more narrow than that. And that's what the research process is for. I'm going to share a classroom artifact to demonstrate how that happens. So this year, a teacher at Lawrence High School, which is where I live in northern Massachusetts, and it's just a little background. Lawrence Public Schools have been in state receivership for over a decade. It's a high poverty community, high immigrant population, so we have issues, right? And that students really are passionate about and want to take action on, but they're not necessarily super confident that they can make a change, right? So they're coming into this very skeptical, right? Naturally, right? When you are experiencing a civic environment that is not responsive to your needs, right? So they identified these big topics: poverty, racism, drug use, and violence. And this is 5 class periods that this teacher has. And this is what she put on the board for starting the research process. She put up the word, and then as a group, they came up with these other search terms, right? So these are things students would Google to get to something more narrow. And through that research process of figuring out how can we get more narrow, how can we get more local through our research, she was able to identify much more specific topics. So poverty became food insecurity at Lawrence High School. Drug use became mental health effects of student drug use. Violence for 3rd period became fighting at Lawrence High School. Racism became health effects of racism on Lawrence High School students. And violence, the 5th period class, became assault at Lawrence High School. So these have gotten much more local, right? Saying at Lawrence High School, right? And also they're much more specific. And therefore, when they reach out to the community and they say, hey, can you help me understand what can be done about poverty, right? It's become, what can we do about food insecurity at Lawrence High School? And so it becomes this much more actionable project that leads to a systemic policy goal that they can work on. And that's the next phase of the project. They identify a systemic policy goal based on the research that they've conducted. And to help them understand what a high quality systemic policy goal is, GC offers a few different supports. This one we present typically for teachers, but they can use it with their students as well. And it's these non-examples, right? So an Action Civics project is focused on a systemic policy solution. And often what students initially come up with as a goal is not exactly Action Civics. They often come up with community service projects. For example, if you've got litter in the streets as your focus issue, students might suggest organizing a volunteer cleanup day to collect trash. That is fantastic. But what happens tomorrow when somebody throws trash on the ground again? What's the solution for that? Education, putting up flyers, going door to door to raise awareness about the littering problem. Again, that is fantastic, but how do we ensure that people take action as a result of that awareness? And they might suggest raising awareness by producing some form of art, like collecting litter and creating a sculpture. Again, fantastic, but not Action Civics, right? What makes this last example of lobby the Department of Public Works to install more trash cans in the streets around school is the fact that it's addressing government structures and branches. It engages appointed officials. There's a timeline for decision making, and it addresses a systemic root cause of the problem. There not being enough trash cans for people to put their trash in, right? And so with that, we help teachers understand what the goal is for shaping that conversation. And then for students, we have this visual aid, right? Does it address individual behavior or does it require a policy change? If it's individual behavior that we're trying to change, we need to choose a different goal. Next, what branch of government does it address? Is it judicial? Because we don't have the time or the money to sue anybody, right? So we're not going up that path. Then once you have a legislative or executive pathway, what level of government do you want to reach out to? We suggest not reaching out to the federal government, primarily because, again, you have a school year to do this project, maybe a semester, maybe a month. You just simply do not have the time to engage in federal advocacy. So if you've got a state or local issue, then you've got a STAR policy goal. And we provide this sentence frame for the whole class to articulate very clearly what their goal is and how they're going to approach it. All right. Any questions at this point? Cool. All right. The next step once you have a goal is to develop an action plan. And often this is like a flip, like they've done the research, they've started reaching out to people, and then all the people that they talk to and everything that they learned during research becomes their action plan, right? So they probably talk to, or at least identify, decision makers and influencers while conducting their research. They will decide who their most important people are, what they're going to ask them to do, and how they're going to engage with them, their tactics or strategies. And they create an action plan. And here's what an action plan looks like. This is from last school year. This is a classroom in New York City. And this is the action plan that was on the board for everybody to see. So a focus issue they identified was that the SSA, which we can assume is some school like administrative organization, discriminates against students of color. The root cause is bias, that students of color are more violent. And they came up with a policy goal of advocating for mandatory anti-bias training for all school staff. And they've identified specific stakeholders, marked them as a decision maker, influencer, that's what's in the parentheses, the D or the I, what power they have to make the change that they would like to see, and what they're going to ask them to do. And if you've got great eyesight, you can see that under each stakeholder's name, you have the group of students who are going to be reaching out to that stakeholder to try to make change. So this is an action plan. And even if a project only makes it to this level, this is an incredible success. How much have students learned about their government or processes for making decisions, how you advocate, how you decide how to advocate and who to advocate for. This represents so much learning. And this is really the power of Action Civics, is the fact that there's something real and tangible, and they create this plan together as a group. Any questions before I move on? We're getting towards the end here. All right. So Unit 4 is really one lesson on repeat, and that is engaging in advocacy. So students have their action plan and they carry it out to the fullest extent that they're able to in the time that they have. And we suggest that their actions have at least one element of each leg of our tactic stool, right? So we've got develop your argument, lobby your decision maker, rally support. We recommend to teachers in classrooms that they have some element of each, because that creates a really strong advocacy project. And we actually provide a tactic toolkit to teachers that has some instructions regarding each of the strategies you see here for compiling research, making a video, making a phone call, writing a letter. We have specific toolkits for that, and that is something that teachers can actually use to assess, right? These are products that students are creating that can be assessed for student learning. And I just want to share what this looks like in the classroom when students are engaging in civic action. This is a few years old and it's pretty noisy, but I think that that is apt. And so I just wanted to share this video, what action looks like.
About your project? Yes. So we decided to focus on the issue of domestic violence and abuse. So we're trying to get a bill passed that's currently in the Business and Commerce Committee of the Texas Senate. It's Senate Bill 918, and it will require cosmetologists to take an online course about how to identify signs of domestic violence and abuse. And they'll be able to report it without getting sued. So they'll be able to help a lot of people. Okay. So what is your goal in this project? Our goal in this project is to help people in Austin be less afraid to act out against domestic violence. So can you explain me what this here? So these are our rally support people. So they've created like social media platforms, and another group has created a website, and we're trying to get our message out there to the world through social media. This is our decision makers group. So this group is going to be calling senators, calling the governor, and trying to get them to start talking about the bill and start, maybe working on the bill. And then this is our developing our argument group, and they're just going to find out as much information about our bill and about and more information about who we can contact and what we can do. Get as much information as possible. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So what I love about that video is one, how articulate the student is, right? Like she cares about this, right? This is an 8th grader, right? These are all 8th graders and they know what their project is and they're able to speak incredibly well about it because they care so much about it and they're so involved. And it's also noisy because students are engaged, right? Even if what we often see is that even if not every student is like super jazzed about the project at first, when you get to the focus issue, like the consensus building piece, by the time that they're seeing their peers be excited and engaged about this, other students rise too. And so the action phase of the project is really
about your project.
A rewarding part of the project. All right, and last but not least, our curriculum includes post-action activities. One really important part of project-based learning is showcasing student learning. And so GC in all of our regional sites does a big end of the semester or end of the year civics day, where students present to each other in a kind of science fair for civics type style. They've got the classic trifold. There are rounds of judges, students get awards, and it's this wonderful celebration. But it's not about the awards. It's a really special event, and it's just really about celebrating students and what they're able to accomplish. And the student you read a testimonial from earlier presented his teacher with a Teacher Changemaker Award last year at the Rhode Island Civics Day. And he kicked off the award ceremony with this, what I found a really compelling introduction to the why.
Is centered around awards. Civics Day is not the point of Civics Day. It's not about awards. It's about the fact that all of you, as young people, have taken a stand for yourselves, for your classmates, for your families, and your communities. No matter what issue you advocated for, you worked hard, you made calls, advocated for change, you made people listen to you. That means something.
That means something. The fact that you did something, that means something. And this was an email I received after a local Civics Day last year from a teacher. If somebody could read this quote for me, I would be eternally grateful.
I can read it. It was one of the most positive and encouraging student experiences I've been a part of as a teacher. Most importantly, the students that have come to represent the school had so much fun, and they were just so excited to talk to all the people. The group that won was so thrilled that they were beaming from ear to ear and showing off their certificates right away. It was so great to have the opportunity to see that and to give the chance to feel empowered and proud of themselves.
And these students went to State Civics Day, and they were in my hallway where I was like the bell ringer for the judging rounds, and they had a little bit of extra time between the end of judging rounds and when they needed to go back in for the ceremony. And they were like, give me another judge, give me another judge. I want to present again. It was the cutest thing in the whole world. And these are 16-year-old boys, right? It was just so awesome to see their enthusiasm and how motivated they were by their project. But what's the point of the project? It's the experience. And it is critical that we engage in reflection on the experience. And GC provides an assessment toolkit, but also within the student handbook, there's prompts for engaging reflection related to the outcomes that we hope for our students. And I have a bunch of things about all the evidence that Action Civics is great, right? Like, students actually do gain more civic knowledge, skills, and motivation. And they talk about how much more engaged they are. And there's evidence that it can lead to greater achievement to be involved in these project-based learning experiences. And I have a video.
I'm gonna try to get to a question,
but I don't really have time to share it. It's okay. But basically, I also believe that it has the potential to help heal the pandemic wounds of disconnection from community. And if you want to read more about this project in Barnstable, I wrote up a blog post, and I can share this video with y'all after the event so you can hear what these kids are thinking about in relation to creating more of a sense of belonging in schools. And let's see, teachers also really like it, right? So often, especially here in Massachusetts and soon in Rhode Island, when teachers are mandated to do something, it tends to make it like not as interesting, right? Like, nobody likes to be forced to do something, but we at GC, we're student-centered, but we're also teacher-centered. I am really dedicated as program manager to making sure that learning how to implement this project is as least painful as possible, because I am here to support, right? And I will come in your classroom and I will co-teach with you if that's what you need to feel confident about it. And so that pays dividends. Teachers really appreciate the support that they get from GC. Does anybody have any questions? We've got I'll wrap that up real quick. We got 3 minutes for questions. I just had so many videos I wanted to share.
I just thought this makes me want to be a student in one of these classes or a teacher in one of those classes.
It really is special. Yeah. I enjoyed it a lot. Victoria, do you feel like you got anything related to that? So I didn't talk about the reading and writing explicitly, but something that I encourage teachers to do is decide what they want to assess before starting the project. And so if you really want to encourage students to engage in reading and writing and further develop those skills, that can be the point of the assessment, right? And then they just get to participate in the project, and then they don't have to worry about you giving them a participation grade,
Right.
which is the solution a lot of teachers go to.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of how the content is structured here, and really just how students understand the content, they know that with their senior project, they do a smaller, coursework grades or formative assessments that lead up to a summative assessment, but they know that because there's summative assessment, not only is their project alone, but also we incorporate civics knowledge along the way. They also know like part of why we're teaching this course is not just for, a grade in a grade book. You're learning about this. So when you go out there and you graduate, that you have an understanding of the world around you, which seems pretty obvious, but being in the classroom, from grade to grade, some students really know a lot about the world around them. Other students may not. So it's just important that they know, okay, like I have passion on a topic, but more importantly, hopefully that passion takes them to, something they're really proud of.
Sometimes they don't know what they know.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the funniest thing is like, government has nothing to do with me. And I was like, how do you get water? You turn on a tap, right? Like, a lot more than you think you know. And it's all about observation.
Do you get much parent input or comments about the program?
Great question. We encourage our teachers, and we actually provide like a template email to let parents know that they're doing the project. Encourage the students to be talking to their parents, right? When they do the community interview, your parent is somebody that you can interview. Your parent is an expert on the community. So we do try to encourage parent involvement as much as possible. Any final questions before we wrap up here today? Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate having an audience. I'm obsessed with this stuff, and I will be following up with y'all with a couple of different resources and an intro to someone within my org if you're interested in learning more.